In previous classes, we've discussed the enormous impact of the Industrial Revolution. And it's important to understand that just as the discovery of animal husbandry, in which we discovered that animals could perform work for us, um, the Industrial Revolution, with the discovery of coal, steam, and machinery, meant that this machinery would now be able to do work for us, but only in a very efficient way where the efforts that would be required to produce one piece of clothing by using industrial mass production techniques, that same effort could produce 20 pieces of clothing. So it represented an enormous opportunity for profitability. Industrialization, though, requires raw materials. And so, with this new opportunity in front of them, the people of power who had the wealth to invest wanted more and more resources. And for America, that was cotton. And for others, it was more of the mineral resources. Um, and so we had the benefit of the Mississippi Delta with that rich, fertile soil that could produce tobacco and could produce cotton that would, uh, be applied within this industrial revolution. Other countries provided more mineral resources. And so we're going to look at Africa and the Congo, which is a very rich uh, country in natural resources. Now, just as we discussed in the triangle trade that emerged with the Atlantic slave trade, there became a business function within the world that was far removed from the day-to-day lives of people. What I mean is they looked at what was the industry, what are the resources that are needed, can they get it to market, who's positioned, who's a good investment, who's a bad investment. You can flip on CNBC any day and listen to that discussion go on. Why is Nvidia doing so well? That kind of question. But away from all of that are the human implications. There's no discussion about what the human implications are. And so um, what's important to understand is that we have this insulated entity that we call business, that is going to do all that it can to maximize its returns on investment and profitability, uh, but it will do it really with blinders, just for conceptualization, blinders on about what might be the human cost associated with it. What I want to talk about is how industrializations start to emerge with capital investment, factories, obtaining raw materials, producing the finished product, and then getting the return on investment. The strongman becomes a very important factor in the whole thing because it's the strongman that becomes the mechanism for controlling the amount of uh, return on that investment that gets sent to the country where the goods, where the raw materials are obtained. As an example, try to stick with me on this. Let's say we have investors who are expecting to produce their product and that they will have revenues, let's say, of $100 million. They can direct 15 million to the top leadership of that country where they are extracting resources. And in doing so, they can make that strongman and the protective edifice wealthy and comfortable. So they have to spend, let's say, $15 million out of that $100 million in revenues, and they spend nothing on the population. So what they then have is $85 million to, pass on to investors and profits and that sort of thing. The population, however, is living a life of being destitute. The strongman, now in comparison, let's say this would be what we would call a hard system of governance, that's how it would work. The top people get rich and wealthy, the bottom people get nothing. Now, let's say we create a soft system of governance. Under that umbrella, we would have our $100 million that is returned on the investment. We have $50 million that we pay in taxes, and then we have $50 million that gets returned to the investors. That $50 million in taxes would be designed to make more common good kinds of expenditures by the government so that the entire country enjoys in the riches that are derived from the resources extracted from their country. I hope that makes sense. Because when the Industrial Revolution took place in the late 18th century, and those of power and wealth discovered that resources were vital to make this industrial machine work, Europe descended upon Africa. At the turn of the 19th century, 10% of Africa was colonized. By the end, 90% was colonized. The Europeans descended upon Africa in a frenzy of stealing resources. In the process, they created a system that was centered on the strongmen. They would allow strongmen to gather enormous wealth and a strong protective edifice, while the bulk of the population struggled for survival. King Leopold of Belgium in the late 1800s, as slavery was being outlawed, he knew that there were great resources in Africa and he wanted to position himself for it. However, he disguised what he wanted to do by leading the effort to end the illegal slave trade. And so what he does is under that disguise, he connects with Livingston and Stanley to understand what's the best place to go. And from their missionary work and Stanley's news reporting, the Congo becomes very attractive. At that time, the Congo was attractive because it had the natural resources for creating rubber. And as the automobile industry was getting its footing, there was a high demand for rubber. So King Leopold then went and colonized the Congo.
When a series of missionary photographs arrived in England in the late 19th century, they caused outrage. The mutilations had been strategically photographed against white for maximum impact. The children came from the Congo, but the man accused of their suffering was white, European, and royal. For almost 100 years, evidence has lain dormant of one of the greatest mass murders. Millions of Africans died in one man's quest for wealth and glory. Until Adolf Hitler arrived on the scene, the European standard for cruelty was set by a king. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, was the personal owner of 1 million square miles of Central Africa and king sovereign of 20 million Africans. In the 1880s and 90s, the world outside Africa wanted rubber for its new bicycle and car industries, and Leopold's Congo Free State had the world's largest supply of wild rubber. The king had struck gold, black gold. He was determined to get as much rubber to Europe as he could, and as fast as he could.
The rubber in this district has cost hundreds of lives, and the scenes I have witnessed while unable to help the oppressed have been almost enough to make me wish that I were dead.
Over a period of 20 years, Leopold turned the Congo into a vast labor camp 80 times the size of Belgium, in the process making himself into one of the richest men in the world. As the number of deaths grew, so did his profits.
This rubber traffic is steeped in blood. And were the natives to rise and sweep every white person on the upper Congo into eternity, there would still be left a fearful balance to their credit.
Leopold became one of the world's most notorious butchers. And when people live under those conditions, they obviously develop a lot of grievances, a lot of hatreds, a lot of desire to want to fight back. Leopold kept them under control with the whip, and he would also take children and cut their hands off. You can go to Belgium and get Belgium chocolates that are shaped like hands in memory of all the children who had their hands slashed off by King Leopold. And so there became a movement to want to fight back against King Leopold and the Belgians. And leading that effort was an individual who would represent the soft approach to governance. And Patrice Lumumba was a socialist, I suspect, is what we would characterize him as. He wanted to get the Belgians out, and he wanted for the Congo to enjoy the fruits of its resources and not a foreign power. That posed a threat. Lumumba posed a threat to the industrialists who were terrified of a communist socialist, particularly Americans. And so, under the Eisenhower administration, the CIA was directed to assist in removing Lumumba and bringing to power Mobutu.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's critical minerals are found across.
First, I want you to understand as well that today the Congo also has enormous resources that are in high demand for the creation of high tech, many different aspects of it. So first, I want you to understand what the Congo represents today.
Various regions. Key areas include Haut-Katanga province in the south, which has vast deposits of cobalt and copper, and North and South Kivu provinces, located in eastern Congo, which are rich in coltan, gold, tin, and tungsten. Lithium is mainly found in the DRC's southeastern Tanganyika province. Lithium, found in southern Congo, is an important mineral used in making batteries for electric vehicles. Cobalt is a vital component in lithium batteries used in electric vehicles and renewable energy storage systems. Rare earth elements are another key resource found in the DRC. They are a group of minerals used in various green technologies such as wind turbines and solar panels. The Central African nation is emerging as a vital player in the global supply chain. The country's contributions are particularly significant in industries like technology, automotive, and renewable energy. According to the African Union, the country's cobalt reserves accounted for 72% of global cobalt production in 2021, with a total production of 119,000 tons. Economic analysts say that if managed effectively, the high demand for critical minerals could attract a significant influx of foreign investment and revenue for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Think of the Congo as Saudi Arabia or Iran or Iraq. What's in their ground is worth billions of dollars, trillions of dollars. And so you can see if you look at places like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, others, there's an undercurrent of political discontent. And so why? Because, well, we've got all this oil. We should be living well, but we're not living well. And what happens is from the oil countries, people there finally decide we have to fight against our leaders. And so they fought against Mubarak and others. Didn't work. So then they decide, well, we have to go to the head of the snake that's providing our dictators with the weaponry to hold us down. That becomes the United States. That translates into 9/11. And so let's start by now meeting the leader, Mobutu.
The man known to history as Joseph Désiré Mobutu was born on the 14th of October 1930 in Lisala, a city situated on the banks of the River Congo. His mother was Marie-Madeleine Yemo and would later be known as Mama Yemo. As a young woman already raising 2 children from a previous relationship, she was asked by her aunt, who was in a childless marriage with a local village chieftain, to join her husband's harem in accordance with a local tradition that gave the man the right to bring in a more fertile replacement. Unlike her barren relative, Yemo gave birth to twins, but when the newborns died after a short while, she suspected her aunt of witchcraft and fled to Lisala. There she met Alberic Gebemane, a cook working for a Belgian judge with whom she fell in love, marrying him 2 months before Mobutu was born. Joseph would later become known as Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngubendu Wazabanga, which translates to the all-powerful warrior who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. He was part of the Ungubandi tribe, a small ethnic group which lived in one of the least accessible areas of Africa, a subsidiary branch of the River Congo called Ubangi that now straddles the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic. At the time of his birth in pre-independence Congo, the Ungubandi were seen as primitive and backwards by city dwellers, a stereotype that so embarrassed Mobutu he would dedicate much of his energy to changing it. Over the course of his life, Mobutu had 2 wives and several mistresses. In 1955, as an officer in the colonial Force Publique, he married his first wife, Marie Antoinette Gabia Tibwa Gogbe Yetene, who bore him 9 children before her death from heart failure in 1977.
This is a longer clip that I think will explain Mobutu, Lumumba, and where the Congo is today.
Encouraged by his bibliophilic tendencies, Mobutu switched his focus from accounting to journalism, landing his first job at a new pro-Belgian Congolese magazine, Actualité Africaine, where under a pseudonym, for members of the armed services could not express their political opinions, he began composing pieces discussing contemporary politics. Given the choice between continuing in the army or pursuing journalism, Mobutu chose the latter, and after a brief stint talent-spotting beautiful Congolese women for a raunchier section of the newspaper, he turned his hand to less frivolous matters as a political columnist beginning in 1957. While working for Actualité Africaine, he was hired as an informer for the Belgian intelligence service. And in 1958, on the pretext that he was reporting on the Brussels World Fair, he was sent to Belgium on a very important assignment. He was to befriend Patrice Lumumba. In December 1958, Lumumba had become the figurehead of the Congo independence movement, when he made a famous speech demanding that Congo be granted self-determination to huge crowds in Kinshasa. In January 1959, capitalizing on his ascendant reputation, Lumumba went to Brussels to introduce himself to the Belgian political elite. It was there that he met Mobutu, and the two men quickly became very close, bonding over their animosity of the Belgians and their desire for a free and independent Congo. So impressed was Lumumba by his companion, who was 5 years his junior, that before long Mobutu had become his personal secretary. He was the ideal aide, engrossing himself into the task at hand by regularly getting up at 5 in the morning and working until 10 p.m., in a job that allowed him to remain in the shadows while also wielding considerable influence. Further outbreaks of civil unrest in Congo between September and December 1959 resulted in the arrest of Lumumba, in combination with general calls for European nations to decolonize, forced the Belgians to negotiate the independence of Congo in Brussels at the Round Table Conference in January 1960. Lumumba was released from jail to participate in talks that lasted from the 20th of January to the 20th of February, which resulted in the independence of Congo on the 30th of June 1960, and the installation of Lumumba as Prime Minister and head of government, while his rival, Joseph Kasavubu, was made ceremonial head of state. The nascent nation, however, was soon dealing with a number of crises. The first, happening within a week of independence, was a general mutiny of the army, which was still being operated and administered by Belgian officers. Believing they were being denied the fruits of independence, the Congolese military took matters into their own hands, demanding salary increases, promotions, and the expulsion of colonial officers from the 4th of July. Ignoring well-founded rumors that he was a Belgian agent, Mobutu was appointed as the army chief of staff in one of Patrice Lumumba's greatest blunders. By sheer force of personality and on multiple occasions at the risk of his own life, Mobutu was able to persuade the mutineers to stay in their barracks, often standing up in front of drunk, pugnacious soldiers with a calm and collected voice as they pointed guns at him and threatened to shoot him. In one of his most impressive interventions, he proved so persuasive that the disaffected lined up so he could take their guns away from them one by one. Congo was plunged into deeper turmoil on the 10th of July and the 11th of July, when, in collaboration with Moise Tshombe and his secessionist Konokat party, the Belgians militarily intervened on the grounds that they were ensuring the safety and well-being of European settlers, which proved little more than a pretext for an invasion of the wealthy copper region of Katanga. Following their lead, within a month, the governor of the neighboring region of South Kasai, famed for its diamonds, also declared its intention to break away from the Congolese fold. The Katanga and South Kasai secessions were deeply problematic for Lumumba, given that both movements enjoyed considerable support from Western governments who feared that Lumumba had ties to the USSR. These governments were further influenced by mining conglomerates still eager to extract African wealth. He was hampered further by the inaction of the United Nations, who, working in concert with Western powers, refused to provide troops to retake the separatist areas. Accepting that he was on his own, Lumumba ordered the Armée Nationale Congolaise, or ANC, to march to South Kasai and Katanga and crush the rebellions. It was to prove another major political mistake, for the embattled Prime Minister's forces completely ravaged South Kasai, committing crimes against humanity that gave Lumumba's internal enemies the excuse they needed to depose him. Responsible for the dishonorable conduct was none other than Mobutu himself, who, as ANC Chief of Staff, had the full operational control of the military campaign in South Kasai. Lumumba made his last and most serious faux pas by turning to the Soviet Union to request transport planes, trucks, and weapons. Duly obliging, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev sent a cadre of Soviet technical advisors who were then installed at all levels of the Congolese government, an intervention that not only marked a dangerous escalation of the Cold War in Africa, but now gave Western powers an easy justification for his removal from office. With both his internal and external opponents on the same page, a vast conspiracy involving Belgium, the USA, the UN, and Mobutu was hatched to get rid of Lumumba. The first move to discredit him was made by his ceremonial president, Kasavubu, who, capitalizing on the massacres of unarmed civilians in South Kasai by the ANC, denounced Lumumba along with the United Nations Secretary-General, Dag Hammarskjöld, who likened the extrajudicial killings against the Lumba populace to a genocide. Deeming him unfit for office, on the 5th of September, Kasavubu announced on national radio that Lumumba had been dismissed, but as the Prime Minister still enjoyed a working majority in both houses of Parliament, he was unable to be removed after receiving votes of confidence. In turn, Lumumba dismissed Kasavubu, but Parliament refused to accept this decision also. Emboldened by the instability, Mobutu, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, was encouraged by his friends to break the deadlock by staging his own coup d'etat. On the 14th of September 1960, with the help of the CIA, Mobutu seized power with the ANC, announcing to the country that his intentions were to temporarily neutralize both Lumumba and Kasavubu politically. In reality, this was a coup against Lumumba, who was placed under house arrest, and not Kasavubu, who continued to carry out his official functions. The ousting of the democratically elected Lumumba was given international approval, when at a UN General Assembly, Kasavubu's delegation was recognized as the representative of the Congolese government. Belgian, US, UN, and Congolese officials now began considering ways to prevent the fallen Prime Minister returning to power, a process initiated as early as the 10th of September, when the Belgian Foreign Affairs Minister, Pierre Wigny, wrote ominously to his team at Brazzaville that responsible authorities had the duty to render Lumumba harmless. On the 27th of November, the opportunity to render him harmless came when Lumumba, realizing he could only regain the initiative through popular support, escaped from his bondage in an attempt to link up with his followers gathered at Kisangani. Working in conjunction with Mobutu, on December the 1st, US and Belgian intelligence agencies tracked him down to Lodi, located on the left bank of the Sankuru River. There they apprehended him and flew him back to Kinshasa, where, in the presence of Mobutu, he was brutally beaten. He was then transferred to the Armored Brigade camp at Mbanza Ngungu in the Lower Congo. But even behind bars, he remained dangerously influential, as by January 1961, legions of his supporters in Kisangani had begun expanding control and authority in the eastern part of the country, fanning fears of a pro-Lumumba counter-coup. With Lumumba now a liability, a decision was jointly made by the Belgians, Americans, Mobutu, and other Congolese accomplices to assassinate him in an operation masterminded by the Belgians. Accompanied by two companions, Maurice Umpolo, the Youth and Sports Minister, and the Senate Vice President, Joseph Okito, Lumumba was bundled onto a plane heading for the Belgian stronghold of Katanga, and along with his comrades was so severely beaten by members of the Luba tribe, eager to exact revenge for the slaughter of their kinsman in South Kasai, that the Belgian aircrew had to shut themselves up in the cockpit to drown out the noise. Landing at Luano Airport in Lubumbashi, he was tortured and assaulted for hours by Katanga leaders and Belgian officers. shot by execution squad, and then in the final grisly step, his body was dissolved in acid. With Lumumba out of the picture, Mobutu and 4 other statesmen formed a shadowy political clique known as the Binza Group that was responsible for every major decision made by the government between 1960 to 1965. It was comprised of the individuals that had control of the 5 most important departments of government, namely the military, the security police, the foreign ministry, the central bank, and the internal affairs apparatus.
Just to interrupt here for a second, is that first, Mobutu is responsible for the troops that went into southern part of Congo and perpetrated what was called a genocide. But Lumumba gets charged with it. But still, despite that, Lumumba keeps strong political support through the country. So they decide, well, I guess we just have to kill him. And you can see the strong arm tactics that are then being used. And remember, what the strong man needs primarily is the police and the justice system. If he has them under control, there's very little anyone can do about it.
These agencies were run by Joseph Mobutu, Victor Ndaka, Justin Bomboko, Albert Ndele, and Damien Kandolo. Together they worked closely with the American, Belgian, and UN officials to impose their will on the succession of weak civilian governments formed after the January 1961 assassination, and to eradicate from the political scene the rest of Patrice Lumumba's supporters. One of their first achievements was quelling the secessionist revolts in South Kasai and Katanga, which were concluded in July 1962 and January 1963 respectively, the latter with the assistance of UN troops. Then, due to continued heavy-handed tactics by government officials, widespread popular discontent led to 2 armed insurrections against the government by the end of 1963 that enveloped the western, northeastern, and eastern portions of the nation. The first uprisings, which centered around the west and northeast, were coordinated by Pierre Mulele, the first prominent Lumumbist to return to Congo after having spent the last 15 months training in revolutionary guerrilla warfare in the People's Republic of China. In the opening stages, Mulele scored a dramatic victory against Mobutu and the Binza Group by successfully seizing a large segment of Kwilu province, during which he was celebrated for killing an army colonel and commander. Legendary among his compatriots, Mulele became so popular among the revolutionary fighters that it was commonly believed he had invented a magic formula that transformed bullets into water. However, unable to expand his territorial gains, the revolution lost its urgency, with Mulele and his commanders making little progress in the Kwilu bush over the next 5 years. In August 1968, having gone to Brazzaville in the Republic of Congo for medical treatment, he was lured back to Kinshasa by the Binza Group on false promises of reconciliation. When he arrived on the 8th of October 1968, he was immediately apprehended and murdered in a horrifying display of brutality, which was a glimpse of the horrors Mobutu was capable of. Later on, when he had consolidated his hold on the country, Mobutu became more subtle with his methods, preferring to bribe his enemies into submission. The second revolt, headed by pro-Lumumbist Christopher Gobenye, was different to the Mulele uprising in that the main tactic was to use large-scale military offenses to capture key towns and cities rather than to wage a protracted guerrilla war in the countryside. Like Mulele's, at first Gobenye's insurgency, mainly carried out by drug-addled gangs of youths calling themselves the Simbas, was extremely successful because it was able to secure large swathes of land covering more than the entire eastern half of the Congo. However, disorder soon swept their conquered territories, and the popular mandate was lost as the unruly Simbas massacred large numbers of professionals, intellectuals, and unarmed civilians in drug-fueled rampages. The Simba Revolt, which was largely financed by Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet Union, was finally put down by an American-funded counterinsurgency, Operation Dragon Rouge. With all pro-Lumumbists neutralized and the situation largely pacified, moderates outside the Binza group, led by President Kasavubu, then attempted to make a fledgling parliamentary democracy. In 1964, a new constitution was ratified, and during May 1965, the first non-violent national elections were conducted since independence. Although showing promising signs that Congo had the potential of becoming a working democracy, a general consensus arose among Western powers that a chaotic parliamentary system wouldn't adequately defend their own commercial and geopolitical interests well enough. Instead, a strongman readily available was needed to keep everything from falling apart. And so on the 24th of November 1965, with the backing of Western sponsors and the support of a populace fatigued by constant war, Joseph Mobutu took over the central government by promising that within 5 years he would hand governmental control back to civilians. In the words of one biographer, no other president had been presented with a country of such potential yet achieved so little. No other leader had plundered his economy so effectively or lived a high life to such excess. Between 1965 and 1997, Joseph Mobutu presided over one of modern Africa's most corrupt, amoral and venal regimes. The Mouvement Populaire de la Révolution, or MPR, established on the 20th of May 1967, became the primary instrument of ideological control and political stability in Mobutu's Congo. It was
I hope you see some similarities. Talking about how they've accomplished nothing. Here we have a nation of great wealth, great power, great resources, yet our political leadership is on vacation. And, all the corruption and other things that are there that kind of follow the pattern. And so they're still under a shadow dominance by Belgium and the United States. But we'll see how, and the business world continues to bribe people so that they can get what they came for.
driven by base, insatiable greed. Congo was financially devastated in part because Mobutu knew absolutely nothing about economics and found the topic extremely boring, his eyes often glazing over when the subject came up in governmental meetings. He hated it so much that when it was mentioned in conversation, he would change the topic. And when he was given an economic document, he wouldn't even bother looking through it before handing it off to an aide to deal with. Not interested in carefully listening to honest advisors about promising long-term economic plans, Mobutu gradually replaced them with sycophantic yes-men who only offered him quick-fix solutions that hadn't been properly examined and which, when enacted, only wrecked the economy even more. Mobutu ultimately allowed his entourage to do what they liked with the state treasury because he could log the offenders' illicit activities with the intelligence services so that, if necessary, he could later blackmail them. For 32 years, Mobutu presided over a broken state riddled with the most abusive forms of corruption. But he was ultimately able to cling on to the top job for so long because of the support of the USA, Belgium, and other Western benefactors. For the USA, whose main Cold War directive was to combat communist ideology wherever it developed, he was viewed as the strongman that Congo needed to stay together so that it, and indeed the whole of Central Africa, could more effectively fight off the advances of communism. For the Belgians as well as the Americans, maintaining a cooperative relationship with Congo was good press because it reinforced their own credibility as reliable international partners. The product of 5 years of political crisis, Mobutu inherited a nation mired in economic turmoil, in which gross domestic product, commercialized production, and agricultural exports had fallen off a cliff. His biggest obstacle was dealing with the results of an unfair treaty with Belgium, who on the eve of independence had not only dumped much of their external debt onto Congo, but who had stolen many of the assets that rightfully belonged to Congo by forcing them to legally transfer the state investment portfolio over to them. This put Mobutu, who was backed by Belgian patrons, in an awkward position, necessitating a strategy in which he served his puppet master's interests while at the same time adopting an antagonistic public stance against them.
And so we get the Congo gets to a circumstance where the with economic distress, and where the countries exist to serve the 1%. And that 1% involves a lot of foreigners from Belgium and the US.
Cattle herds to people who couldn't tell a bull from a cow. Ordinary Congolese citizens could only watch on in horror as businesses closed, prices skyrocketed, stock was emptied and sold, and jobs were doled out on nepotistic lines. Most of the revenue was pocketed by the new owners who spent their proceeds on luxury items, illustrated by the fact that imports of Mercedes-Benz hit an all-time African record just 1 year after Zairianization. The result of this state-sponsored banditry and the funneling off of most of its resources out of the country was that very little was left to spend on important sectors such as infrastructure, health and education, which deteriorated so rapidly that by 1975, living standards began to gradually decline, while thousands of children every year continue to die from preventable and easily curable diseases like malaria, measles and dysentery. Rampant crime spread across the nation, and in one instance, in a slip made during a live television broadcast, Mobutu could be heard telling employees to "go ahead and steal as long as you don't take too much." The immediate effects on the economy, which had been growing at an average of 7% a year before Zairianization, were devastating. And from 1974, the economy began a slow, steady decline that it never recovered from. Mobutu had also picked the worst time to financially ravage his nation, as global prices for copper, one of Congo's most profitable exports, fell by 2/3, while concomitantly, oil prices nearly quadrupled. Realizing the Pandora's box he had opened, Mobutu desperately tried to appeal to former owners by paying them some compensation and offering them majority shares, but no one was willing to invest. The blow to Mobutu's credentials as a leader as a result of Zairianization was so catastrophic that he would never again try to coat his regime with an ideological sheen. For the rest of his time in office, Mobutu shored up his position through bare and often brutal pragmatism, only being concerned with what was necessary to keep him in power and allow him to make money.
One more.
Transition could be put together. Mobutu did everything in his power to impede progress and frustrate pro-democracy advocates. This included blocking the reports on assassination and ill-gotten property to spare him embarrassment. He also interrupted the public reading of the Political Affairs Commission report for the same reason. From these negotiations was patched together an agreement called Le Compromis Politique Global, or Comprehensive Political Compromise, outlining a 2-year plan in which a government and parliament was to be elected by the CNS, while Mobutu stayed on as ceremonial president. On the other hand, Mobutu made sure to make the charter as vague as possible, leaving room for him to exploit various loopholes he would later use to his advantage. As soon as the compromise was transformed into the Provisional Constitution on the 4th of August 1992, the dictator got to work undermining the democratic transition by attempting to remove Tshisekedi wa Mulumba, the leader of the UPDS, as prime minister. At first, Mobutu tried to achieve his aims through terror by firebombing the UPDS's headquarters a couple of days before the prime minister's vote on the 14th of August, in the hopes that their members would react violently, thus giving him the excuse he needed to declare a state of emergency, close the CNS conference and take back control. When UPDS members did not take the bait and stayed calm, Mobutu next tried to dislodge Tshisekedi by sponsoring a rival candidate, Thomas Kanza, and bribing CNS delegates for votes. His ploy, however, did not work, and Tshisekedi was chosen as prime minister with 71% of the vote in an election seen as the freest and most democratic in Congo's history, despite the despot's meddling.
Okay, so I think what's important to see here is that the strongman performs a function that is very important to those of wealth and power. It means they only have to take part of the money that they are skimming from that country and pay that to the strongman, while the rest of the population is struggling. If they didn't do that, it would mean they would have to take less out of that country. I mean, it wouldn't be substantial, but they would then have to distribute more of the financial uh, fruits of the minerals in that country to the rest of the population. Okay, Dave, we can open for discussion.
Okay, please use the raise your hand function. And Sal, I had a question. You said the UN promoted regime change in the Congo. And my question is why didn't Russia veto that since they're on the Security Council?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Don't know.
Bill, William?
Yeah. Pretty doggone scary and most fascinating. I lived in West Africa some of the time, and we didn't know all that was going on. But my main question is, what's the psychology of these dictators? I mean, why in the world do they do it when they could just go off somewhere and be billionaires and live as they wished?
Well, I think what you get is someone like a Mobutu who comes from, an austere background, and he's a manipulator, and he kind of stumbles into it. He's in the army. He probably through his period as a journalist, he made some relations with the Belgians, people from Belgium. And what happens is now when the country is, fighting for independence, he makes a deal with the Belgians to be a spy. So he's sent to, make nice with Lumumba and get close to him. And he does. So it's like at the same time he's plotting the end of Lumumba. So he succeeds at that game. And then once he's at the top of power and he is getting as much, it's like Putin. He's got as much money, he can spend it the rest of his life. Why would they do it? It's the power, it's the greed, it's the insatiable, I gotta have more, more, more. That's how I read it, Bill. And it's you can see it play out in so many different places. Look at what we're going through now. What what do we gain by cutting off food to the world's hungriest kids? I mean, what is America's GDP going to go up? There's no benefit other than power. I've got to show my power and disruption and hurting people. Do you want to help people or do you want to hurt them? And there are people who that's it. Their thing is they've got to hurt people.
Yep.
I'm sorry if that's a long-winded answer, but
That's good.
Norm?
Yeah, our son lived in Kinshasa for about 3 years. He was deputy to the mission chief for the UN peacekeeping. And one of the reports he got every day was how many people have been killed and their names.
Yeah.
And it's the legacy of the Belgians is imprinted on that country. There are the roads in Congo are only to the supply points. There's no roads across the country.
Yeah.
And so the country is fragmented, and the government in Kinshasa, which is supposedly the national government, does not control the rest of the country. In the east, the Rwandans are now occupying, and a group called MS-13 is occupying Goma and the eastern provinces, and that's where the natural resources are located in the southeast and the east. And the Chinese have a big hand in that. And most of it is artisanal. Artisanal means it's by hand. And the conditions are abominable. And they're beyond abominable. And there's still a lot of death and killing. And it's interesting, the UN operated these clinics throughout the country. There was Ebola going on at the time. And when it looked like the UN was turning a corner, the militias would attack the clinics because they wanted the clinics to stay there. They wanted the money. It's just an absolutely brutal, and I think the Belgians are to blame. I mean, and there's a very good book called King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild, which I found very difficult to read. It was the amount of torture and death in Congo was incredible. And Stanley, the famous Stanley explorer, was Leopold's henchman. So he's held out as a hero, but he traveled on the Congo River and set up outposts for King Leopold. And I say King Leopold because he personally owned it. The Belgians did not. And he never visited the Congo. It's one of the most brutal chapters in African history, and it's still going on. And the government is very weak. The central government is very weak. And it doesn't look like it's getting better. If anything, it's getting worse. And the blessing and the curse of the Congo is that it has all these valuable natural resources.
Yeah, it's. I think what's one of the things that's very interesting to me. I compare it with the oil-rich nations.
No, but at least they have governments, and at least there's some central control. In the Congo, that's not true. It's worse.
Well, what I find interesting about it is that the oil-rich countries will someday be rendered much less relevant than they are today as the world transitions to electric battery-powered vehicles and other things like it. And what would be that the key ingredients for battery-powered vehicles is there in Africa and also in China. So I think what you see is that, again, it's a commodity that if you are the strong man and you gain control over that commodity, I mean, it's not something that is produced out of the brilliance of someone. It's just that's what's underneath our rocks. And if people can get it out, it's a commodity that everybody needs and we'll be selling loads of it. But when you consider that out of all of those resources that are there and the financial wealth that can be generated by it, it's all going to people outside of that country, as happened in the oil-rich countries for a very long time. So it's following a pattern.
But again, the dynamics are somewhat different. For example, the UN Security Council, which really controls the UN, because of because Russia's on the Security Council, can veto anything they want, has cut back on the UN peacekeeping operation. And guess who's coming in instead? The Wagner Group. And what do they get in return? They get natural resource concessions. So
it becomes really a corrupted state. That's what becomes government there.
There is no government.
So
I mean, it's not. I would not even distinguish it as a government.
Well, I understand. But look, I wouldn't consider the Saudis to be a government. So I'm just saying is that you can, in a broad sense, you can see the patterns emerging. The Congo was also a place where, before the Atlantic slave trade, the African slave trade was robust, and it was led by emperors. And so they were, again, the strong man had power, and everybody else had to succumb to that. So I think it's a tragedy that these people who have lived under such harsh conditions for thousands of years are now living under extremely harsh conditions within a different context, but a lot of it is following a similar pattern. What is the commodity and who's getting rich from it? And mind you, again, America is very deeply involved in Mobutu's rise to power. The CIA plotted, planned, and participated in the assassination of Lumumba, who was trying to lead it to a different form of government. Right. Yeah.
Main thing is that its legacy is still going on.
Right. Sure. Yeah, it still is going on. And I think as we look at today, for anybody who's looking at the markets and, who's doing well, why is NVIDIA doing well? Where are these? Well, a lot of it hinges upon what relationships they have with the countries that are providing them with the base natural resources that they've got to have. Mind you, right now, today, the economy is terrible. Yet the stock market continues to do well. Well, who's doing well is AI. The companies that are planning to be, in the game of AI. And so the people are continuing to invest in them, betting on who's going to be the winner in the AI competition. But what's totally left out of the conversation are the people who are living in that lithium-rich world who are living on $2 a day, $2 a week. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, the Elon Musk, the world's richest man, denying food to the world's poorest people. Nothing captures it better than that. It is Elon's business hinges upon what will come out of that ground. And he's cutting off food to the poor people. It's just another example of what you get when the strong man is in power, and he's in power in service to the people behind the scenes who are, getting rich through their industrial operation. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Norman.
It is now high noon. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Real quick, what happens with these strongmen? They must have always people that are waiting to depose them, that are trying to get in there. And I have to say that a young Mobuto sounded like Stephen Miller today.
You see, I thought you were referring to J.D. Vance, who's already, measuring curtains in the White House.
Right. I have to think, I know that they have the protective edifice working for them, but that can change on a dime. So I'm just kind of wondering what,
But that's the the strong man has to monitor who's in the king's court that's there to oppose him, and you try to kill him as soon as you can. That's I mean, look, it how many people has Donald Trump thrown into the gutter? I mean, it follows a pattern. That's what I think is important to see, are the patterns that are there. And I think as you listen to like what's going on in the Congo, there's many comparative events going on today in America.
very well, yes, the stories sound similar. Yeah, certainly.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, can everybody unmute and give applause to Sal for another
And what about next week?
hey, what's next week?
Oh, next week we're going to look at Viktor Orban, who's like a little bit different from the people we've looked at so far, but a lot of similarities too. So we'll be looking at that. And I've talked with George about having people, be able to express whether you like or you dislike the class, that kind of thing. And if you could, direct it to George so that there is an anonymity, but that kind of feedback would be important to me. And trust me, negative feedback is very, very helpful. I like to know what you like or what you don't like. And so I encourage you to call me names.
We love the tip up top this morning. That's what we like.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, we'll see you next week. Oh,
All
and
right.
I'm going to really the obsession with the fear of communism. I'm going to send you a link to a video on YouTube about Karl Marx that I think you would find interesting. It's about an hour long, I think, but just more stuff for you to kick around. Okay, everybody, see you next week.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Sal.